Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Snowflake, Datavid, and Dataiku. I'm Stephen Fegg, Director of Database Trends and Applications and Unisphere Research. I will be your host for today's broadcast. Our presentation today is titled Succeeding with Generative AI and LLMs in the Enterprise. Before we begin, I want to explain how you can be a part of this broadcast. There will be a question and answer session. If you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box provided and click on the submit button. We're going to try to get to as many questions as possible later. Plus, all viewers today will be entered for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card just for participating. Now, to introduce our speakers for today, we have Julian Ferrero, AI Product Marketing Lead at Snowflake, Tim Padilla, Director, Sales and Consulting, North America at Datavid, and Dmitry Risev, Sales Engineer at Dataiku. I'm going to pass the event over to Julian to get us started. Welcome to the broadcast, Julian.
Hey everyone, thanks Stephen. Great to be here. And today I'm going to tell a little bit about how at Snowflake we see the world of generative AI playing a role in enterprise and how our focus on ease of use and security is a great way for you also think about how you approach your Gen AI needs. At a very high level, the way we think about things at Snowflake is that the most important thing is your data, right? LLMs have been trained with tons of mostly free internet data up to a certain date, and they don't have access to a lot of this proprietary and sensitive information that lives inside the enterprise. And as free data sets on the internet are starting to run out, all this data becomes even more valuable in this wave of Gen AI. And so how do enterprises make sure that they keep that data secure? And more importantly, as they start to use that data against LLMs, whether it's with prompt engineering, RAG, or fine-tuning, how do you also keep those models secure? And so really, how do you think about the foundation that maintains security and governance of both the data and the models? Now, the cool thing about Gen AI is also that you don't need experts to use models anymore, right? Before you had to have specialized data scientists to be able to even get started. Now, just natural language-based interaction with a model, and you can do a lot of things. And so the way we think about this is, how can you use Gen AI within seconds? And so really this is like, how do we build an experience that anybody can use? There's no integrations needed, and things are as easy and simple for an analyst as a SQL function, or sometimes there's even a built-in GUI that you can use for that. But then we do know that a lot of value comes with customization, right? And so you want to enable a lot more people to build applications on top of these LLMs. And so really we think of it in two ways. One is, how do you make it easy to build the most common app scenarios in minutes? And then as customization, scaling, and more complexity comes into the use case, how can you make adaptations to it with more flexible infrastructure? In this case, containers. And so in the way we look at that is, we think of how do you get to value fastest with generative AI? I think there's, in many ways, there's many things of what we want to do, right? We democratize data by making AI sort of like the new interface with our data. That's a big goal in any enterprise. But I think a bigger goal would be, how do we get AI into every part of the business? And in order to do that, you can sort of take it an appeals me approach, where you can do the fast things and get value fast. So how do you get AI in seconds working? How do you then build applications that can be customized to specific use cases without a lot of complexity integrations? And so we call that the apps in minutes experience. And then ultimately, how do you customize as much as you want without having to move data out of that secure and governed environment where you've landed your data, which it could be Snowflake or some other table format that you've connected to Snowflake. At the core of all this stuff is Snowflake Cortex, which is our LLM service. So this is a GPU environment that gives you access to industry-leading LLMs, whether they're open source or commercial, and they're accessible via easy either SQL function or Python function. And so it makes it really easy for both analysts, data scientists, and other developers to access all this stuff. And this includes LLMs, vector search, and all that kind of stuff. We like and trust that environment so much, so we actually build applications on top of it. And so this is what we call Document AI, Universal Search, and Copilot. At a very high level, Document AI is an easy way to extract fields out of documents and make those models part of a SQL pipeline. And so you can sort of do a lot of unstructured data processing with that. Universal search is just a way in which we build semantic search to quickly find data sets and code and all these other things that you store in Snowflake. And then Copilot is the English to SQL assistant that we're building on top of the platform. But then those are sort of like, call it, applications that we've built. So they have their own front ends and targeted for very specific use cases. But if you want to build your own using all that LLM and search functionality that's in Cortex, you can build application front ends using Streamlit. And Streamlit, for those of you not familiar with, it's a Python library that lets you build front ends using Python. So you can quickly spin up a web app and, like example, build a chatbot in just a few lines of code using Streamlit chat elements. And then, of course, we have a whole set of container infrastructure that you can do pretty much anything in there. Fine-tuning models, deploy open source databases, and do all those things close to the data. So there's a lot of efficiencies that you get from that. But how does it actually get used? And so I think the most important thing, right, is there's vision of like democratizing data with AI, where like I write English or my spoken language of choice, and then that turns into a bot that can go and look for all this data. And I think it's a great goal. And us being a SQL first platform, we know how hard that goal is. It's becoming very, very hard to build this like multi-purpose copilot. And so we think of like, how can you process unstructured data? Then how do you build chatbots on top of your documents and then use that as a way to quickly get value? And so I've outlined some here, right? Like summarization, all this kind of stuff that you can do, document processing, those things can be really quickly. And in the resources section, you can find links to these demos of how you can do all this stuff in Snowflake. The other thing is you can build a whole RAG framework inside Snowflake without having to build any integrations. And like I said, you can build chatbots in minutes. And that's a really cool thing about either to build as a prototype or something that maybe it's going to be used by a team that doesn't need a very advanced front end to be able to chat with documents. And of course, democratization is going to come when it's easy to turn English into SQL. And we're building a very advanced model to do that. It's probably turned out to be the hardest thing to do. And so we're excited about learning everything that everyone's working on to build similar things, as it's turned out to be a very challenging process. And we're very excited about being in the forefront of working on this stuff. So yeah, thanks for having me, and look forward to the questions later on.
Thank you very much, Julian. Okay, we are on to our next speaker today. Once again, Tim Padilla, Director of Sales and Consulting North America at Datavid.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Padilla, Director of Consulting and Sales for North America, as Stephen said, at Datavid. My role is to connect with our customers on the value of building solutions for data at scale applications. And I have a long background in delivering technology, both inside companies and through consulting partnerships. At Datavid, I'm helping to connect our customers with our experts to build information architectures that solve complex problems and to extend those architectures to integrate advanced technologies, AI that we're talking about today. Okay, a quick Datavid introduction. As a consulting firm, we're focused on data engineering to bring value from our customers' data. And we're experts in helping to define and deliver database solutions at scale. We thrive on the big customer challenges that require broad sets of data to inform and solve the big, complex problems. A core competency is delivering knowledge management platforms that are often based on semantic data. And these platforms are the bedrock of user-facing applications. Beyond services, we also have several data-focused product offerings, but that's kind of a talk for a different day. Quick look at our team profile. We align our talent to customer value and bring a wealth of experience and innovation. You can see we focus on hiring experienced consultants, and hiring is a key term here. Our consultants, with only a few exceptions, are Datavid employees. And our team is aligned to value-based services using a mix of offshore, and nearshore talent. And we work with a broad set of technologies. I think everybody on this call would probably recognize the list. But we also have several partnerships to provide professional services for data technology vendors. Okay, so my talk today is around data platforms and easing generative AI into them. I think it's a kind of a consistent message with all of the speakers today. But knowledge management, it's a journey, right? And it's essential to solving complex problems. And as an organization, we start by generating and managing data in compute systems, something we've been good at for decades. But the data tends to be raw, distributed, and reports often tell only a portion of the story. And that's a story almost as old as time now, right? But as we move to managing the information, we curate our data by bringing together or harmonizing the distributed data sets and classifying the information, make it more useful. Turning our information into knowledge with the modern tools allows us to embed our experience and gain insight that was previously buried in the data. And the wisdom gained in our platform moves us from reactionary to anticipatory in the management of our businesses and reduces our decision risk over time. Adhering to FAIR principles, and that's findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, that enhances the value of your organizational knowledge and ultimately makes your technology and apps more usable. It's the firm base of a knowledge management platform. And a knowledge management platform is a firm base to build data-centric applications on. So as we look at integrating AI into our business applications, we need to update and enhance our technical delivery methodologies. And we're seeing an explosion in business sponsorship of AI initiatives and the ask for it. But it's really important to vet the ideation because AI is technology like any other, but it also has unique considerations for implementation, use, and governance. The normal things apply, like having goals, a way to use the technology, nothing changes there. But it serves to have a hard look at these for an AI project and a bit harder than in the past. One of the things to point out, we've all seen the ugly, but, kind of funny examples of how AI got ahead of the governance. And so you really need to have a look at that. And one of the things we like to see here is adopting problem framing into your agile processes to not only define the problem you're trying to solve, but again, to vet if AI is a good fit and if needed. Okay, a little chunkier stuff here. The principles we just quickly walked through were put in play at a customer to build an application enhanced by generative AI. And the architecture uses retrieval augmented generation, or the RAG, model, which has been a thing since 2020, and it's gaining both adherence and additional methods. It's really getting a foothold. We feel it's a strong way to leverage knowledge management platform to bring additional and interesting functionality to users, and also effective way to help govern the usage of business applications and do this with velocity and agility. As mentioned, this diagram is from a recent customer engagement where we essentially prompt engineer the information sent to the LLM. The result is a better search experience with natural language functionality. It's a dramatic increase in the accuracy of the generative answers provided by using our semantic tagging service, the knowledge graph, to extract the user research concepts. We prompt engineer the query and the context together and submit them to the LLM model to have the answers generated. And we do this here without vectorizing the customer data, but this is, of course, an option within the RAG model. Okay, thank you. I'm looking forward to our next presenter, Dimitri.
Thank you very much, Tim. Once again, Dimitri Risev, sales engineer at Dataiku. Dimitri, welcome to the broadcast.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So yeah, my name is Dimitri Risev. I work at Dataiku as a solution engineer. And today we'll be talking about how Dataiku enables AI at scale through some collaboration and how we work within the GenAI framework as well. I wanted to start off by first exploring what Dataiku is for those who aren't familiar, and then we can talk a little bit about our offering as it relates to GenAI. So what is Dataiku and why do our customers love us? Dataiku is unique in the market in the sense that we provide a centralized analytic workbench across a wide spectrum of use cases and personas. So whether you're doing basic data preparation as a business analyst, or you're a data scientist or a data engineer who's coding in PySpark and SQL and Scala and other languages, you have a place within Dataiku because we meet you where you're at in terms of your technical proficiency and your ability to work with data. Likewise, we're an end-to-end platform as well. So we support everything from data access and cataloging through data preparation, machine learning, whether it be visual or in custom code, and the production, MLOps, and monitoring of your pipelines as well. From a technology perspective, we are fully agnostic in this regard, meaning we are not tied to one particular vendor from a hyperscaler perspective or from a data structure perspective. Dataiku is not a data storage layer, and we are not a compute engine. You can think of us as an orchestration layer over top of your organization's existing resources, compute, storage, and otherwise, where your users have the UI that meets them where they're at in terms of their ability to work within their data in a governed and auditable manner. Now, what does that mean specifically for GenAI? Well, The value proposition is very similar to our historical use cases and techniques. But now we've added in this additional architecture that we call the LLM mesh, where your organization can leverage some of the most bleeding edge technologies from these various different LLM providers. And what we provide is the ability to develop and deploy these types of AI-related applications throughout the enterprise. So now you're able to build these applications regardless of the model that you want to use, in a very user-friendly manner with many plug-and-play solutions that Dataiku provides for both the technical expert and the business expert to be able to leverage these technologies. In addition, we integrate with your existing enterprise analytics strategy. So this isn't a siloed solution that's only useful for the GenAI context. You can actually augment your existing capabilities, whether it be like traditional analytical techniques or predictive techniques, with these LLM capabilities. So you have kind of the broad spectrum of use cases available within one centralized governed platform. Third of all, you can choose the right model and provider for your specific use case and for your needs. Dataiku does not limit you in terms of its connection to any particular service or provider. So over time, as the flavor of the month changes in terms of the right or the best model for your use case, it's a simple click of a button in Dataiku to adjust that selection. And then last but not least, we also enforce standards to deploy these applications safely and reliably from the ground up, with our out-of-the-box monitoring, auditability, PI detection capabilities. And at the back end of this is this new capability within Dataiku called the LLM mesh, which we refer to as the backbone for all GenAI applications, where we've separated or decoupled the application or the business logic from the AI service layers. Your end users can develop their applications, their pipelines, their RAG pipelines, their chatbots, and other GenAI use cases without having to worry about connecting to the various API providers or host their own local models. All of that is taken care of in the background, and your users only have to worry about the business logic as it relates to working with these models. From a centralization perspective, we also enforce a secure gateway to these approved services and maintain an audit trail for any queries that are done to these LLMs to ensure there's no issues there. We ensure safe use by defining filters for the queries for any sort of terms that may be not useful or maybe safeguarded, like proprietary data with these APIs. We help to control costs by providing cost monitoring and avoiding any unnecessary regeneration with duplicate queries. And we help you to build out-of-the-box retrieval augmented pipelines without having to write any piece of code. The four different categories that we're seeing with our customers in the GenAI space are as follows. The first level is simply integrating these capabilities, these LLM technologies with your pre-built components, basically NLP type use cases that you're probably doing today with other tools. We would strongly recommend that you consider using LLMs out of the box as they are for these types of use cases. And actually about 30% of the use cases that we're seeing at Dataiku revolve specifically around these sorts of functions. The second is around prompt engineering. So maybe the use case requires you to adjust the prompt slightly for whatever you're trying to accomplish with your LLMs. This is a very common task. I'm sure you've all heard of the prompt engineer. Dataiku provides built-in functionality called the Prompt Studio, where you can iterate on your prompt and compare prompts and compare model results, including their cost versus their performance, to see which prompt makes the most sense for the use case that you're trying to accomplish. That's about 40% of the use cases that we're seeing, 30 to 40 in the market. The third level is around adding your proprietary information, your internal knowledge, unstructured text documents, PDFs, Word documents, that sort of thing. Being able to build out that sort of pipeline to take that information and send it as a part of the prompt to the LLM is something that we're all seeing. Dataiku has provided an abstraction layer over top of that, so you don't have to worry about writing the code and stitch together the services to make this work. And the last level we're seeing, which is honestly less than 10% of use cases, if that, are around advanced techniques related to A, fine-tuning models, and B, related to creating these various types of AI agents through capabilities like LangChain. What are our key differentiators as Dataiku? Number one, as I mentioned before, is ease of use. So being able to democratize access to these capabilities is a very important aspect of any organization's LLM strategy. Being able to speed up the time to insight as it relates to working with these LLMs is going to be a key differentiator for organizations moving forward. The second piece is around security and control. So we've all heard of shadow IT risks, and there's news about security leaks and people sending proprietary information to third-party API services. Nobody wants to get caught with that. So having the application level from the ground up, be able to track any queries that are sent to these APIs and be able to catch any issues related to that is going to be key. The third is around choice and agility. I think this is a really key point, is you don't want to be locked into any particular model provider or cloud provider as it relates to your LMs, because these things change. Right. This week we came out, or we heard Mistral came out with their large language model. Maybe that becomes the model that is useful for you in your particular context. In Dataiku, it's a simple click of a button in order to change the model underlying that you're using for your application. So having the ability to future-proof yourself and always work with the latest technology is going to be a key piece moving forward. And then last but not least, Dataiku is a holistic platform, not just for GenAI use cases, but for all use cases end-to-end, analytics and AI related, whether it be just basic data prep all the way through advanced neural net building and fine tuning. Having one place where users can collaborate and work with the business in a collaborative manner is going to be key as well. And last but not least, I want to leave you with the use case that we're seeing. We're working with many use cases and many customers around LLMs. But this one here is very interesting because they saved a ton of time reducing their the build of their use case from multiple weeks to 1 day in Dataiku by us providing that abstraction layer for them to be able to build their RAG pipeline. In this case, it was a health and safety team that has thousands of pages of documents related to health and safety of their products. This is for LG Chemical, and they wanted to automate the process of querying that documentation using a RAG pipeline with a web app. And Dataiku was able to help support that, then building that and being able to control the capabilities of that web app so there's no unnecessary leakage of the data or anything like that. Is a very common use case that we're seeing and we're helping out with. But thank you for your time so far. I'm looking forward to the questions, and I'll pass it back off now.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. Okay, now for my favorite part of these webinars, we're going to have our group discussion. I've prepared some questions so that we can really dive into the nitty-gritty of issues as concerns generative AI and large language models. So to kick things off, first question, and Dimitri, I'm going to go with you first. What are some of the most compelling use cases for generative AI in enterprise settings that you've come across?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's quite easy to think of GenAI and think of chatbots, right? Because we're all familiar with ChatGPT and these sorts of interfaces. And of course, that's a very powerful use case that we're seeing with many of our customers, especially as it relates to asking their proprietary information within their confines and within their security protocols. But some other compelling use cases apart from that we're seeing are, number one, as I mentioned earlier, anything NLP related. So you can think of text summarization, entity extraction, sentiment analysis. You can pretty much plug and play a lot of these LLMs, and they're going to do at least as good or even a better job than some of the more traditional NLP techniques. So that's a very quick win and low-hanging fruit for a lot of organizations. So you can think of use case examples like summarizing earnings calls transcript from your competitors and being able to display that for yourself as the C-level, as a CFO, as you're going into your earning calls and understanding what the topic du jour is across your industry, summarizing news articles, social media feed, sentiment analysis. These are all very common use cases we're looking at today. Another one is around augmenting traditional use cases specific to LLMs, being able to look at, say, a traditional ML use case like the classification of churn and adding a GenAI component. So being able to develop, say, tailored marketing content once you determine who your highest risk customers are and give them the very specific tailored piece of content for that individual.
Understood. Julian, what are your customers at Snowflake?
Yeah, no, I love what was just discussed because I think we all think of chatbots and it seems easy. That seems like the easy thing to do, but there's so many NLP use cases that customers can be doing and getting value really quickly. I think sort of jumping on where you finished there at the end is I actually see GenAI being a lot used be sort of like data preparation before the machine learning model. and then be a front end to the machine learning model, right? So like we have all these teams that have made huge investments in their machine learning. How do you prepare more data for those models, right? Tons of text has been pretty much untapped for machine learning. And so like, how do you create features, do summarization and things that you can do from all that text that's coming in? And then how do you customize the results, right? It's been hard to interact with those models in the past. Now using natural language, right? Maybe it's an email script. That's what needed to happen before, and we didn't have an easy way to do that at scale. And so putting it in the front of the machine learning model and at the end of the machine learning model seems to be a high value add scenario, which sort of leverages a lot of what was just discussed.
Understood. Tim, would love your input on this question as well.
Good answer. So it kind of makes my part here easy. From a use case standpoint, we work with companies that are just literally swimming in data, as everybody does, right? So being able to enhance search is a big piece, and be able to link back to the documents that they're searching against, and often, as was said, summarizing the research. Maybe you're looking at developing a new drug, and you want to be able to go back and look through all the research and find something that you just didn't know was there, like a case for how this drug might help. Or you're an engineering group that is looking for a starting point for engineers that are, in the business of building out large scale facilities, but they all look the same. So what have I built in the last 10 years, but what are the new specifications for equipment? What are the regulations that I have to meet? And give the engineer a starting point and save that data wrangling time, but also give them a leap forward.
Moving on to our next question, and Tim, why don't we start with you? What are the key risks and challenges enterprises need to navigate to effectively leverage generative AI and LLMs?
Yeah. In a simple sense, for me, it's two things. The governance of the use of Gen AI and the sake of using it. As I say that, maybe those are kind of the same thing, right? But I think it's really important to properly vet the use of AI, and we're seeing instances where like a semantic data platform can meet the need, but the business is pushing to use the new technology. And because there's so many requests coming from the business, you want to align, and you want to make sure you're spending your finite resources effectively. I think there's value in proving these cases in rapid fashion, and to be able to vet, and so be able to have an environment. We've all said, like, integrating an LLM using RAG model, for example. It's I don't want to trivialize it, but you can do that. You can do that pretty quickly, right? You can do these proofs quickly to prove, to literally prove out if it's a good case or not. I think that's really important to managing risk.
Understood. Julian, your thoughts on this, and I might add, how big of an issue is data security?
Yeah, I think the usual, whatever happened in the previous AI wave is happening again, right? How do you bring data together? How do you make sure it stays protected? The skill set that are needed, right? There's a lot of like off-the-shelf stuff that you can do, but eventually customization might be necessary, right? Using a model that knows everything around the world might become expensive. And so then how do you start using smaller models to do custom things? And so you start getting into topics like fine tuning, and you kind of start thinking of like, do I have the right skill sets to do all that kind of stuff? And so I think the general sort of like teams, processes, data security, it's all happening all over again. I think the one thing that people we're still seeing much of is like, how do you protect the data when you start onboarding a lot of applications, right? I think we spoke about everyone saying like, oh, it should be an application. That's an application. It's a RAG application. It's easy to protect the data when it's all being built inside. But what happens when you start bringing all these SaaS vendors that are using your data to build LLMs on that data, right? How are you protecting that data? How are you gaining control of that LLM that's being used? I think that's a challenge that as an industry, we're going to have to solve. And so it's one that I say like we should be cautious of how we're using third-party apps now, that LLMs can just grab so much knowledge, which is, for now, the most valuable thing that companies have is that internal proprietary data.
Understood. Dimitri, anything you'd like to add to this question?
Yeah, I think it comes down to kind of four main key risks that we're seeing and challenges that we're seeing in the market. Number one is the fact that things are changing really quickly. right? So being able to choose the right model provider, choose the right architecture underlying, and be able to swap out when needed as your use case changes and as the latest technologies change, of course, within the control and confines of your IT landscape, is going to be absolutely critical. But you don't want to hardwire yourself to any particular model or provider. Second is around costs and benefits. So, these LLMs can do some really amazing things, some really amazing use cases. They can also add up pretty quickly in terms of costs, to be honest. And I'm sure a lot of us have seen that if we've ever tried to build a pipeline that's encompassing many different data sources and trying to fit it into a giant prompt, and we're seeing what the output of that looks like. So having the ability to not just understand the use case, but understand the actual value and the business benefit behind it is a really critical piece that I think a lot of organizations are going to grapple with moving forward. The third is around talent shortage, and maybe something we'll talk about in more depth as we go along, but being able to empower not just data scientists or data experts, but the domain experts to be able to work with this technology is going to be a differentiator for organizations. So you're not limiting this capability to a subset of your organization. And then another key piece is around the privacy, security, and frankly, the compliancy concerns related to LLMs. We know that the regulatory bodies are coming out with different rules and legislation related to LLMs and to AI in general. So organizations are going to have to keep abreast of that and prevent issues in the organization related to things like data leakage we see in the news, inappropriate content. And these are going to be more so at the forefront as these LLMs get more powerful and more ingrained into our day-to-day.
Absolutely, and that's a great point, Dimitri. I'm sure we will see more regulation come out on that, and that'll create both challenges and opportunities, as it always tends to. Okay, Julian, I'm going to go with you first on this next one. Just opening it up a bit here. Does generative AI require enterprises to think differently about their data strategy? And if so, what are some things they need to think differently about?
Yeah, so I think in terms of data, the same patterns of previous AI waves is one, how do you bring it together? And so how do you eliminate silos? How do you ensure it's governed so that only to meet compliance, regulatory, and only make sure the right people have the right access to the data? How do you build governance on top of that? And I think in this new wave, and sort of Dimitri alluded to this, is like we're using data for analytics. We've been using data for ML. How about we don't create a new silo for generative AI? And so then how are you thinking about that data strategy where you're not sort of like every time there's a new wave of something cool, you have to create a new silo because you have to introduce new infrastructure and you have to use new tooling and all that requires you to copy data outside. And so how do you eliminate that idea that every time something new cool comes out, there's new silos? And so I'd say that's the one thing that I would tell enterprises as they're thinking of their data strategy. Be like, okay, what steps do I take to not create a new silo as I'm implementing some new use case or POC with generative AI?
That's a great point. Tim, are you seeing that amongst your customers as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we always advise people to take actions based on data strategy. Going back to what Julian said about silos, I mean, our whole thing with creating a knowledge management platform is to not silo your data and be consistent and build it in a way where you can add applications to your existing data and enrich your overall platform. And I think to me that's probably the most important point. There's specific stuff you go through, about identifying data, determining data usage, organizing your data to be successful with AI, but really taking those actions and looking at your overall platform. And I think we've all been consistent in our talks here about how you do that.
Dimitri, what about you?
I'll echo everything that was said so far. I think those are really great points, especially as it relates to making sure these are not built in silos, as Julian mentioned. I will add one thing as well, which is specific to LLMs. Data quality is going to become a very key aspect that organizations are going to look into. There's going to be an increased emphasis on the quality of the data as these LLMs are quite sensitive in terms of their performance related to that. And also, organizations are going to start thinking of their proprietary data as more of a moat than they ever have before, because that's going to be their differentiator, and them being able to build their own models, whether they're internal or external facing. These models are going to become table stakes to some degree quite soon in terms of their performance. So the differentiator for the performance of the models for these organizations as a whole are going to be the data that they feed into it.
I'm glad you brought up data quality. We actually have a few different questions from attendees today concerning data quality, Dimitri. I'm curious, just as kind of a quick poll amongst our speakers today, we received a question and basically, what are your thoughts on the opinion, we are not ready for AI until all of our data is governed and we know we can trust the data quality? Would you agree with that, statement there, or is there a little bit of wiggle room or gray area to that? And Dimitri, why don't we start with you on that?
It's a very fair question. And, there are risks inherent to leveraging LLMs in an ungoverned manner, as we all know. But the reality is that shadow IT is a real thing. Even when organizations try and limit organizations' ability to work with LLMs, users will go out on their own and begin to build out these use cases because they know it provides value. So IT organizations need to get in front of that, be able to engage with their end users to understand the requirements and why an LLM might be useful for their use case, and build out a prototype, build out a POC with the data that's available, see what the performance looks like, keep it internal, keep it low risk. There are grades of risk with regards to deploying these LLMs. You don't have to deploy a chatbot external facing from day one. You can see how chatbots look internally and see how they perform, and begin to, in parallel, build out your data landscape and your governance process. There are platforms that can help with this, like Dataiku, so everything is built in from the ground up. But in general, I would not shy away from leveraging LLMs, leveraging these technologies until everything is perfectly hunky-dory, because you're just never going to get there. So I would not consider that to be realistic.
Yeah, and shadow IT does happen. Every major technology trend, if IT isn't ahead of it, you see it kind of sneaking in at a departmental level. Julian, would you agree?
Yeah, I think the one thing that was in the statement is all data. You don't need all data, right? Because that's typically what leads to those shadow IT projects, is that you find a corpus of information that is useful enough for a team or a set of users, and as long as they make that clean enough, you might be able to get the right thing that you want, right? And so you might be able to document chatbot, a search system on top of that maybe something like your sales operations team or your customer service, right? They're always looking at these user guides to try to find answers when they're on the phone. And what if you just make all those user guides easily available in a simple, more advanced search system than ever before? And you don't have to get all the data, right? Did I have to put everything around marketing or everything about the customer? Maybe I don't have a full customer 360, which should be the goal then, but I can start adding value with chunks of that data. Well, eventually, sure, I'll get all of it and it'll be the most valuable ever. But doing it in chunks actually makes sense. And so enabling teams to do that in a way that doesn't evolve into shadow IT, I think that's what's really important, in that balance and challenge is what organizations need to address.
You don't have to boil the entire ocean, and you can kind of do things incrementally, test things out. Tim, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think consistent with what our other two speakers have said, and I think it's also doing the proofs. I think it's a way where you can start to point out where your gaps are. Do you have a data quality issue over here, over there? You can start to hone in on that, because you'll see the answers come back kind of wacky. It's not necessarily hallucinations. You're feeding it the wrong information to answer the question, and you can start to get to the basis of that.
That's a great point. And, DBTA fielded a study on the current state of data quality last fall, and we found out pretty quickly that a lot of companies are finding out about data quality issues from new data analytics and kind of AI machine learning projects. So that's another way to kind of see where you're at in that regard. Moving on to our next question, and Dimitri, I'm going to let you go first on this. Is predictive AI, aka machine learning, going away as the industry moves into the age of generative AI?
Short answer, no. I would say it's being augmented in many ways. It's definitely not going away. There are many predictive use cases that actually can be augmented with LLMs to, as I mentioned before, generate contents or help interpret the results of a predictive model. It's a very common use case we're seeing as well. There are also, as we are starting to understand, inherent limitations to what LLMs are capable of, at least today. And there are places where other techniques are actually a better fit. So you can think of the classic example, like a regression calculation. LLMs still aren't great at math. So having the ability to actually plot a regression line and make that calculation is something that traditional techniques would be better suited for. Maybe in conjunction with an LLM to interpret the results of that regression or to generate content based off of that. But they can work hand in hand. But the idea that we'll be able to provide capabilities for these end users so they can leverage both types of techniques or many different types of techniques, whether they're LLM, traditional machine learning use cases, data prep use cases, at the appropriate time and in a pipeline or in conjunction with each other in order to generate business outcomes. That's still at the end of the day what we're trying to achieve. So it's important to have a way to abstract the complexity of these various techniques and ensure that as many organizations as possible, or as many individuals within an organization as possible can leverage these technologies, while at the same time making sure that governance and safety is still a top priority.
Thanks, Dimitri. Tim, what are your thoughts on this question?
And again, similar. I think that the use cases. I've worked a lot in manufacturing, for example. So you want to look at what's happening on your manufacturing line, and you have machines that are doing things that are calibrated to a spec. And when they get outside of that spec, you start throwing away parts. So having some predictive capability to look at the trend and stop, to get a tech out there to recalibrate it. It's a simple example, right? But that's still a solid case for predictive ML. And I think we have such a vast amount of things that we're trying to get done. We shouldn't just wholeheartedly say, "Oh, GenAI is a solution for all of these things." There's still standard non-AI technology that is still valid for so many of these things too.
Sure. They've been calling for the demise of the mainframe for years. Mainframes are still around. Relational databases are still around. Absolutely. Julian, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think not to repeat everything Dimitri or Tim already said. I think what's really nice right now is that predictive and generative sort of like are very well defined. And like, if I want to do a forecast, it makes more sense to go predictive route. If I want to generate custom text, then I go the generative route. But people are starting to blend the two. And I think in next year, we're going to be like, hey, do I build a forecast with a generative AI model or do I use a predictive model? And so it becomes like XGBoost versus ChatGPT or OpenAI for building a sales forecast. And I think it's not going to be this year problem because there's still a ton of research happening and making a possibility. But it's something to keep in mind as it's the swim lanes are clear right now. We don't know if that line's going to get blurred as more of the statistical or math components become more efficient in LLMs, which that's the one thing they're not good at, right? They're not good at math. But if they get good at math, we might see that predictive side become part of all these large models. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves in the year to come.
Absolutely. Okay, so Tim, this next question is right in your wheelhouse at Datavid, veers into knowledge management. What are the, Julian, Dimitri, if you'd like to weigh in, please feel free. But Tim, what are the elements of a KM platform that need to be in place to be quote unquote LLM ready?
Yeah. I think it kind of comes back to the biggest piece is some form of a data hub. So if you have a semantic capability inside that data hub, it certainly helps to bring your information together to be able to do better prompt engineering. But having a consistent set of data that is brought across your organization in that data hub is going to be the biggest thing. And we could talk for days about classifying and categorizing information, and that certainly helps as well. That basis of having your data harmonized, having a consistent view of your data and a complete set of your data. And again, I don't mean to go back to what we were talking about before. I'm not saying that you need all your data and all your data needs to be perfect, but having a risky term here, an authoritative source to pull information from and do your prompt engineering is going to be key.
Yeah, and I kind of see what you're saying. You can't necessarily wait until everything's perfect because nothing's ever 100% perfect, but there are certainly things that help. Julian, was there anything you wanted to add to that question?
Yeah, I think in semantic search and all this stuff is not new, right? It's existed for a while. I think sort of on the topic of like what have been things that recently became important to do is like business documents where like 10, 20 people reviewed it and agreed on the language that was on that document. In some way that's clean data, right? And so like how do you make those clean data sets that are PDFs, user guides, manuals, research papers, all those things a lot more accessible? And I think what we're learning is like chunking strategies. And so we're having to think about new problems that nobody had really thought about before for these elements. Like what's the best chunking strategy? Or like how do I do indexing? If I'm using RAG, how do I do prioritization of the keyword versus semantic? And so I think that whole piece is going to continue evolution because documents are actually pretty well organized pieces of data. And so there's a lot of value that we can get from those. And search is a great way to do that once we figure out the right way to implement search on top of those documents.
Absolutely. Dimitri, anything else you'd like to add?
My expertise isn't around knowledge management, so I'll definitely defer to Tim on those points. But in terms of being able to be LLM ready as an organization, I do think it comes down to a few key pillars. Number one being granting access to the users as holistically as possible to work with these technologies. So it's not just siloed to one particular group or subset of users. I think that's going to be very key moving forward, is providing an interface and abstraction layer for users to be able to work with these technologies, but to make sure that it's in, again, a secure and governed way. I think with LLMs, there's going to be new risks that pop up related to data leaving its residency and sending sensitive information outside of the specific guardrails. So there are capabilities that should be in place, both at the knowledge management level and on top of it as well, to ensure that users are able to work with these technologies in the way they feel most comfortable in, but in the way the organization and IT feels comfortable in as well.
Yeah,
understood, Dimitri.
And Stephen, one more point, is it like, and Julian mentioned a good thing about documents, importing documents. You can pull so much information out of a document. And contracts, for example, there's policy information inside of there that can help you govern better. So once you actually get that information out and you can have it in a more structured fashion than having to go read a bunch of documents, you can then do all of the things like Dimitri was mentioning about IP leakage and things like that. Those policies can help govern as you move forward with LLMs.
Okay, moving on to our next question. Of course, we've talked about technology and kind of best practices in general around that, but there's also the matter of people when it comes to these types of initiatives and projects. So, Julian, why don't we start with you? How can enterprises foster a culture of innovation and experimentation to effectively integrate generative AI into their workflows?
Yeah, I think the big piece is how do you enable exploration without having to move into shadow IT type of situations? And how do you do it for multiple users, right? I think the cool thing about generative AI is now everyone can speak to a model, right? You don't have to be a coder anymore, or you don't even need an advanced GUI to interact with things, right? It's just English-based. I can do and try things. And so because it can be so broad, we have to figure out the right way to enable the analyst, the business user, the Python developer, the advanced software engineer. What is the spectrum that all of those different users need to then experiment and play around with the different technology, whether it's open source, commercial. And so I think the strategy is like how to bring AI into every part of the business. That means how do I bring AI to every user? And then how do I make it easy for them to use it without turning into shadow IT? Because like I said, the data is the most valuable asset, and you don't want shadow IT to enable lack of control or protection on that valuable enterprise asset when using other systems. So,
Dimitri, any recommendations from your side?
I would echo everything Julian just said there. I think he summarized it very well. I think providing a governed entry point for end users to avoid shadow IT, to be able to work with these models, because we know that that's going to be a differentiator for these organizations, is absolutely critical. The only thing I will add to this is to say that organizations should encourage the use of these capabilities, but they should be tied to business outcomes from the outset. It's very easy to begin playing around with these models and seeing some interesting or cool results and saying that that's enough because they're building out a chatbot and it's giving them some interesting feedback. If they're not tied to business outcomes, the cost could spiral out of control. The results could be hallucinations, and there's no great way to evaluate out of the box these sort of results. So being able to tie the results of these use cases to business outcomes to ensure they're providing an ROI, while at the same time providing the right enablements and the right tool set for these users, I think is going to be absolutely crucial to foster that sort of culture of innovation and experimentation.
Glad you brought that up, Dimitri. Tim, is that something you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I think I mentioned problem framing and design thinking. I think bringing those practices into our methodologies, updating our agile methodologies, and really, asking questions differently so you get down to the problem, and your vetting, I think is very important in this space.
Okay, moving on to our next question. There have been many studies and news articles pointing towards an AI skills gap at organizations. So, what skills are essential for taking advantage of GenAI and LLMs, and how can IT and business leaders create a culture that fosters success in these areas? Likewise, are there ways that IT professionals and information workers can better equip themselves to contribute in this space? I know that's a lot, kind of a broad question, but Julian, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, no, I think the most important thing, right, because now we're not just talking about developers, everyone, is ethics and trust, right? We now have systems that can generate answers about anything. And so this whole concept of hallucinations and understanding that just because I ask something doesn't mean that I'm getting a response that's accurate. And so just enabling everybody in the organization to understand, one, what am I doing with that data? How am I giving it to an LLM? The consequences of doing that when it's not something that it's being managed in a proper way by a central IT or a team that we trust. So that's that. And then the ethics of how you use it, bias that might be in there, guardrails that you have to implement. Those are all things that I think everyone in the organization needs to be enabled on. And then, of course, we're going to have to figure out both as we move more into like fine tuning and organizations training their own models, the number of AI researchers and the number of people that understand the complexity of fine tuning and how to prepare data sets now for this specific type of scenarios is going to be important. And so that'll be key. But I think baseline, we just need to get everyone on the same page around trust and ethics before we really go big with all this generative AI.
That's a great recommendation. Tim, what are you seeing as kind of the essential skills right now?
Yeah. I like how you said that, Julian, around trust and ethics. And one of the things I kind of skipped over previously, and I feel bad because I have a long background in anti-piracy, but IP protection, getting people to understand the use of the technology. There can definitely be IP leakage, and you have to be really aware of that. So I think an overall holistic look at how you use the technology, how you approach the technology, the things that you should do, the things that you should not do. Organizations really need to take a hard look at that. But also, I think, like ChatGPT is out there, like having users actually use it. It's a double-edged sword, right? But getting people to understand when you ask a question, this is how it responds. Again, it gets to that trust and ethics, and people seeing how you can get it to kind of go off the rails a little bit. That will give them better understanding of governance in an enterprise IT environment.
Sure, and we there's probably been some news headlines about various inaccuracies. Dimitri, anything you'd like to add to this question?
Yeah, the most underrated skill right now in working with LLMs is clear thinking and clear writing. As we talked about before, it's no longer a prerequisite to have to know Python in order to be able to work with these models. You can just fire up ChatGPT and begin prompting and asking questions. So what's going to happen is the domain experts in your organization are going to become more and more valuable because they have the most business context and are closest to the real world problems that can be solved with these types of models. So being able to provide the right tool set and the right playground for these types of users so they can experiment in a governed manner to avoid shadow IT, like Julian was mentioning, is going to ensure that they can build up the skill set to understand how these LLMs work, to build up that sort of clear writing and prompt engineering practice and provide more value for the organization. And the second part of your question related to, how can IT professionals upskill and equip themselves to contribute? Things move really quickly in the space, as we see. There's new models being released every day, new capabilities, new techniques. Of course, there's a lot of resources online to get up to speed, but I think the biggest takeaway is that you need to get your hands dirty and work with these tools. You need to be able to try working with these models, build your own use cases, build POCs, see where the strengths and the weaknesses of these various models are, test various types of models and see which ones are better for specific use cases, and don't tie yourself to one particular vendor or model as it relates to these LLM providers. Because before you know it, another model is going to come along, and that's going to be the hot topic of the day.
Understood. Okay, we're almost at the top of the hour. So at this point in time, I'd like to just grab one more attendee question here that I think might be interesting for us to discuss. The question is, and Tim, why don't we start with you? Enterprises often require tailored solutions. How do organizations strike a balance between leveraging out-of-the-box capabilities of GenAI and customizing models to meet specific business needs?
Yeah. It's a great question. I saw that in the console before. I think around the RAG model that we've all been discussing. And we have pretty quick time here, but I think that's one way you can do it. I think there's the idea of building or training a model versus using a model and prompt engineering and sending to the model. And I think we're at the point now where using a model versus training a model is going to be predominant and is going to be realistic. I think over time we'll get to the point where creating your own model is more doable. But I think again, that having that platform, that knowledge management platform, having the ability to organize your information and get your experience and your sentiment into the prompt that you send to the LLM, that's where you're going to get your value. And then integration of the LLM is not, I don't want to trivialize it, right? But that's not the thing. It's getting your overall platform ready to go.
Understood. Dimitri, anything you'd like to add?
So we typically take a tiered approach to this as it relates to each individual use case, where we start with the out-of-the-box capabilities of these LLMs and work our way down depending on the performance requirements of the use case. So oftentimes it's the case where the out-of-the-box LLMs are going to provide adequate results for your use case. So that's why you need to understand from day one, what are the business outcomes you're looking for? And if that's enough, then great. Leverage those out-of-the-box capabilities. Don't try to boil the ocean and fine-tune a model if you don't need to. If it's the case where you need additional prompt engineering or you have to add in your own proprietary information, you can consider leveraging these sorts of prompt engineering techniques where you can keep the model as is, but then maybe you add additional information in the prompt in order to get it to work in the way that you want. And that's really that prompt engineering practice that we discussed earlier. And then last but not least, only in the case where these other techniques have failed, then you can begin to look into fine-tuning these models or, last case scenario, training these models yourself. I do want to stress the fact that oftentimes when I work with clients, the top two approaches that I mentioned are going to fit the bill. So there's no need to put in the extra effort if you're already able to solve the use case with the out-of-the-box solutions.
Understood. Julian, would love your thoughts on this question as well.
Oh, it took me a second to find the mute button. I think couldn't say it better, Dimitri, in that, and what they said is, how do you use stuff out of the box? And in some ways, how do we teach everyone to be better writers? Because now how you tell the model and how you give it instructions, you have to be very clear. I always think about it as in the past, you always had to hire contractors and you had to explain to the contractors, hey, here's the job that I want you to do. And if you're really good at explaining things, the first wave of the work that comes back from the contractor is really good. If you're not good at explaining what you want, then the work's going to be really bad, right? And that's kind of what's happening with LLMs. And so in some way, our communication and writing skills just need to get a lot better to get a lot of value faster, because I think a lot of prompt engineering is going to be doing that. And then, of course, organizing data in search and knowledge databases so that people can do RAG, style-oriented systems. So like, how can you maximize not having to customize models would be ideal. And so like, you don't have to build everything custom, but you do have to give it your data or your prompt. And you have to think very carefully as to how you do that. And communication skills are going to be more important than ever before to stay away from having to customize things. Otherwise, you have to learn a ton, or you have to teach the LLM tons of lingo about a company and all these other things that add complexity and require customization of the model.
Understood. Okay, we're just about time to wrap up, but real quick before we go, I'd like each of you, if there's one thing you'd really like our attendees today to walk away keeping in mind, what would that be? Julian, we'll start with you.
Don't create a new silo. Protect your data.
All right, I like it. Dimitri, how about you?
Make sure that you stay flexible with your choice of LLM provider and the sort of pipeline and work that you're building, because it is inevitably going to change over time.
Great. Tim, giving you the last word.
Yeah, my thing is get started. Do some proofs. Do have within your governance model, vet those the use cases. A lot of the same things we said. But get started and start to prove this out, because the time is here.
Absolutely. Well, I would like to give a huge thank you to our speakers today for coming on board and sharing their insights and expertise. Once again, Julian Ferrero, AI Product Marketing Lead at Snowflake, Tim Badia, Director of Sales and Consulting North America at Datavid, and Dimitri Risef, Sales Engineer at Dataiku.